They pried his jaws apart. Then, as he writhed in terror, they poured molten gold down his throat. The molten metal seared its way inside him, burning him alive from the inside out. This was not a quick death. It was a spectacle of slow, deliberate cruelty, and it would become one of the most infamous executions in ancient history. The victim was Marcus Licinius Crassus, once the richest man in Rome and a powerful politician. He had wealth beyond measure and commanded armies at his whim. Crassus was a member of Rome's first triumvirate alongside Julius Caesar and Pompey the Great. Yet despite his influence and riches, he craved something more: military glory to match his partners. In 53 BC, Crassus marched east with 7 Roman legions, seeking conquests in the Parthian Empire. He was eager to prove himself, hungry for prestige and perhaps the rumored gold of the East. But his ambition would lead him and his men into a nightmare. The Parthian Empire was a formidable foe, and Crassus's invasion would soon turn into a disaster of unimaginable scale. On the arid plains of Mesopotamia, under a blistering sun, Crassus's army met the Parthians at the Battle of Carrhae. He expected an easy victory. Instead, he found hell. The Parthians came with tactics Rome had never faced: waves of armored cavalry and swarms of horse archers. Arrows rained down like a deadly hailstorm, their hiss filling the air. Roman shields clattered as the soldiers huddled in tight formation. They formed a tortoise of shields overhead, hoping to wait out the onslaught, but the arrows kept coming without end. Hour after hour, the Parthian riders encircled the Romans, shooting relentlessly. The sun beat down, and thirst and panic set in among Crassus's legions as their numbers dwindled. Desperate to break the siege of arrows, Crassus's son Publius led a bold charge with the cavalry. They galloped out to strike the Parthians and silence the bowmen. It was a trap. The Parthians feigned retreat, luring young Publius and his men far from the safety of the main army. Suddenly, fresh enemy riders swarmed them. Publius and his brave companions were cut off and overwhelmed. Surrounded in the desert, they fell fighting to the last. Publius Crassus was killed in gruesome fashion. As the battle raged, the Parthians lifted a grisly trophy high for the Romans to see: Publius's severed head impaled on a spear. The sight shattered Crassus's heart. The Roman ranks trembled at the horror. Their general, a father, was forced to witness his beloved son's head displayed like a macabre banner on the battlefield. Nightfall brought an end to the slaughter, at least for a moment. Thousands of Romans lay dead or dying on the sand. Those still alive were exhausted and terrified. Crassus's grand invasion had become a bloodbath. Of his 40,000 troops, half were already dead. Others were wounded or thirsty, with no hope of reinforcement. In the dark, a desperate plan took shape. The Parthian general, Histoeureka, offered to negotiate. He sent word inviting Crassus to a parley for peace. Crassus's men, battered and leaderless after the day's carnage, begged him to accept. They could fight no longer. Reluctantly, with grief and despair weighing on him, Crassus agreed. But this agreement would seal his fate. The meeting was a ruse, one final deception by the victors. In reality, the Parthians had no intention of mercy. At dawn, Crassus went out to meet Histoeureka between the two camps. The remnants of his army watched anxiously as their general walked toward the enemy lines. Histoeureka greeted Crassus with a polite smile and even offered him a horse to ride so they could talk eye to eye. Crassus hesitated, sensing something was wrong. In that tense moment, a scuffle broke out. Roman officers suspected treachery and panicked. Swords were drawn. Suddenly, chaos erupted around Crassus. The Parthian soldiers sprang their trap. They fell upon Crassus and his escort. Crassus tried to flee, but in the confusion he was thrown from his horse and overpowered. His bodyguards were cut down where they stood. The Roman general, drenched in sweat and dust, found himself surrounded by hostile hands, yanked to the ground and bound. Crassus, the mighty conqueror who had once made kings bow with his wealth, was now a captive of his enemies, and the Parthians intended to make him suffer. They dragged him back to the Parthian camp as a prize of war. There would be no honorable prisoner's treatment for this Roman. Histoeureka had something special arranged. The richest man in Rome was about to die in a way that would symbolize his greatest sin. His captors prepared to kill him with the very thing he valued most. Crassus was forced to kneel. Rough hands tore off his armor and fine robes. He was left in rags and chains, exposed under the same merciless sun that witnessed his defeat. Perhaps he begged for his life, or perhaps he was beyond words, numb with shock. It did not matter. The Parthian soldiers surrounding him had hearts hardened by war. Before Crassus, the Parthians brought a cauldron. Inside it, gold coins and bars from the Roman treasury were melting over a roaring fire, bubbling into a molten pool. The heat was intense. Crassus could feel the furnace-like air on his face. The golden liquid shimmered, a glowing torment prepared just for him. He realized what they meant to do. A shiver of pure terror ran through him. The wealth he loved so dearly was about to become his murder weapon. Two men seized Crassus by the hair and tilted his head back. Others forced a metal pry into his mouth, wrenching his jaws open until his cracked teeth bled onto his tongue. Crassus's eyes went wide with panic. He struggled, but strong arms pinned his shoulders. There would be no escape, not from this. Histoeureka himself, or one of his men, lifted the cauldron of molten gold. The onlookers fell silent, watching the gruesome execution about to unfold. They mocked Crassus, even in this final moment. According to legend, one Parthian jeered that since Crassus loved gold so much, he should drink his fill of it. The soldiers laughed coldly as they prepared to pour. Then came the end. The scalding hot gold was tipped and began to stream out. The liquid metal gleamed as it flowed, a ribbon of death cascading toward Crassus's face. It hit his open mouth and flooded down his throat. Crassus might have tried to scream, but no sound escaped, only a ghastly hiss as the molten gold burned everything in its path. The inside of his mouth blistered instantly, his throat charred black. The gold poured deeper, searing through flesh, sealing off his windpipe and cooking his lungs from within. Crassus's body convulsed in agony. Steam and the smell of burning flesh burst from his gaping mouth and nose. His legs kicked against the dirt as the liquid fire consumed him. Within moments, Marcus Crassus, once the most powerful and wealthy Roman, was dead. His corpse collapsed, smoke curling from his throat. The Parthians had literally given him a golden death. But even in death, they were not finished with Crassus. The cruelty continued beyond his last breath. What came next was a final, macabre humiliation. A Parthian soldier drew his sword and sliced off Crassus's head. This severed head, still bearing a grotesque expression of pain, was lifted high as the soldiers cheered. They would make use of this grisly trophy. Crassus's head and also his right hand were sent eastward as gifts to King Orodes II of Parthia, who was celebrating a great victory. At the king's banquet in the capital, a Greek play was being performed for the court. When Crassus's head arrived, the performers seized upon it for a cruel joke. In the midst of the performance, an actor lifted the bloody severed head of Crassus and used it as a prop. Before the laughing audience, he recited lines about vengeance and triumph over enemies. The hall roared with approval. The richest man in Rome had been reduced to a prop in a play, his death turned into entertainment for his conquerors. Not content with that, the Parthians staged a mock triumph. They reportedly dressed a captured Roman who resembled Crassus in women's clothing and called him Crassus in derision. This prisoner was paraded around as if in a victory parade, a twisted parody of a Roman triumph. It was the final insult, mocking not only Crassus, but the pride of Rome itself. News of Crassus's horrific end sent shockwaves through the ancient world. In Rome, people could scarcely believe that one of their triumvirs had been destroyed so utterly. Crassus's death was more than just the loss of a man. It shattered the balance of power in Rome. With Crassus gone, Caesar and Pompey's alliance unraveled, and the Republic slid toward civil war. Meanwhile, the Parthians had made their point with brutal clarity. Rome had been humiliated. For years afterward, the Roman people spoke of Carrhae in hushed tones, horrified and enraged. Tens of thousands of Romans had died or been enslaved after that battle. Roman standards, the golden eagles of the legions, had been captured by Parthia, a stain on Roman honor. It would be decades before Rome avenged this defeat. The memory of Crassus's fate lingered, a cautionary tale about the cost of pride and greed in the face of a merciless enemy. Marcus Crassus's story is a grim lesson in the dangers of unbridled ambition. He had everything: wealth, power, influence, yet he wanted more, and it led him to ruin. His gruesome death also stands as an example of the cruelty of revenge. The Parthians didn't just kill him, they made his death into a spectacle of pain, a message written in blood and gold. It forces us to wonder, was this justice served for a greedy conqueror, or simply an act of barbaric vengeance? Did Crassus's lust for gold truly merit such a horrific end? In the end, all his riches could not save him from the consequences of his choices. The wealth he cherished became the instrument of his destruction in the most literal way. Think about the image of one of the world's richest men choking on molten gold. It's a dark, poetic irony, a punishment that fit his crime, devised by those he sought to conquer. Would you have risked everything as he did, chasing glory and riches into the unknown? And if you did, could you face the kind of terror that Marcus Crassus met on that final day? Thank you for watching and listening to this harrowing tale. How does the brutal death of Crassus make you feel? Does it shock you, anger you, or leave you pondering the price of ambition and cruelty? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you thought this was horrifying, just wait until our next story.